particularly hot summer are often so subtle that they sneak up on us. So subtle, in fact, that sometimes it's easier not to think of them or notice them at all. There's an old parable about the frog that jumps into a pot of boiling water. The frog, recognizing that it's hot, immediately jumps out. According to this parable, although I don't know that it's ever been scientifically validated, this same frog, if put into a pot of lukewarm water, which is gradually raised, would not recognize the impending and would remain there until it was too late to jump out of the pot. Unless we recognize the impending danger to our own survival, our fate may be similar to that frog's. As change grows, the College of the Bahamas is committed to doing our part to educate our students and the wider Bahamian community. While all human populations in the 21st century are contributors to climate change, the Bahamian people are not significant contributors in receiving those changes. Rising sea levels have the potential to result in the sea level. It's no longer speculation that warm water in the top layers of the ocean fuel more powerful hurricanes. As the ocean gets warm, there is potential for more powerful and more frequent storms. Even though climate change is taking effect on small island developing states, there is hope. While not the cause of the problem, we must nevertheless be part of the solution. We should not fear this challenge. In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King and Martin Luther King's birthday, he said, "Be careful because today is tomorrow." And this is true of climate change, particularly in a small island developing nation. The college is directing our attention to research and teaching excellence to address the issue of sustainability, both locally and internationally. With support from the Freedom Foundation, COB launched the Small Island Sustainability Program. This multidisciplinary program focuses on policy studies, ecotourism and development, environmental management and ecosystem management, sustainable agriculture, and integrated sustainable development planning. The program also focuses on marine sciences, renewable energy, and forestry. In October of 2011, the College of the Bahamas became one of the first international colleges to sign a growing list and commitment of almost 700 colleges and universities to the College and University President's Climate Commitment. In doing so, we committed, among other things, to moving the College of the Bahamas towards carbon neutrality. That's a long-term goal for us, but every step matters. It also includes including climate change in our academic curriculum and our co-curriculum. We further added a codicil to this agreement, explaining the impact of climate change on small island states and encouraging other island nations to join us in this. Given my own lifelong commitment to environmental issues, long before it was cool to be green, it is indeed my pleasure to welcome an environmental spokesman and advocate, our esteemed guest, Robert F. Wabi Kennedy, Jr. Mr. Kennedy, let me tell you a little bit about him and then we'll get moving. Mr. Kennedy has dedicated much of his life in support of environmental issues. He is widely recognized as one of the United States' most prominent environmental attorneys, working tirelessly to safeguard the environment and public health. He has a passion for nature since he was a child and was considered a nature boy by his family. He spent his early summers training homing pigeons and even caring for an abandoned sea lion. He kept pet snakes and raccoons and is a master falconer. His history connects him with the environment, and that connection is why he is here to bring awareness to the issue of climate change. He is the founder and director of Pace University's Environmental Litigation Clinic in White Plains, New York. He is president of the Waterkeeper Alliance, an international coalition of 99 grassroots groups, and a senior attorney at the Natural Resources Defense Council. His opinion pieces appear regularly in the New York Times and other major newspapers. In 2004, he published Crimes Against Nature, How George W. Bush and his corporate pals are plundering the country and hijacking our democracy. In 2005, he published his first children's book, St. Francis of Assisi, and is the co-author of Riverkeepers. Please join me in welcoming Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. to the college.
Thank you, Dr. Bose, and thank you you for the opportunity to speak to you. If you excuse my voice, I have a vocal problem today. Hopefully it will clear up by the time I finish talking. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I got into the environmental racket. I started out doing this about 30 years ago, working for a blue-collar coalition of commercial and recreational fishermen on the Hudson River to try to clean up the Hudson River. I came here in 2002 to the islands. I've been doing a lot of work in the islands over the years. The Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. I spent a summer of 2001 in prison, a maximum security prison in Puerto Rico for the work that I've been doing. I represented the people of Vieques, suing the United States Navy, and I ended up doing a civil disobedience. They put me in jail there. And then I worked up and down the coast of Central America and throughout the Caribbean islands, and I saw the same thing happening on all these islands, which is that were giant multinational hotels, mainly, and other corporations, who were taking control of the beaches and the shorelines of the islands, and kind of locking the people who once had access to those beaches, and for whom those beaches were a critical social safety net, into the interior of the island, and locking them there in the heat with their resentments and with their anger, and not being able to access the beaches, fisheries, and the places that had once been there, so part of the commons of these islands. In 2002, a group from the United States called Chafin and Light, and then the Bechtel Corporation, were going to do the same thing at Clifton Key. They were the last major publicly controlled beach. And this part of New Providence Islands was Jaws Beach, and they were going to shut off that, give it to a private developer, and of course the law says in this country that you can have access to the high tide line if you approach from the water. But all of these developments make sure to put up walls so that it's almost impossible to access those waterways from the beach. And that's what they were going to do over in Clifton Key. And we started a fist fight over there. It ended up driving out Bechtel Corporation first, and then Chafin and Light second, and ultimately Prime Minister Christie made that a national park. I think it's the largest national park on the islands, and preserved it permanently on behalf of the people of this island. But this is a fight that I've seen happening all over the Caribbean, all over the islands of Asia and the Pacific, but also in the United States, where I started this. Riverkeeper, it was almost the same battle, and I was representing people. You know, we have on the Hudson River one of the oldest commercial fisheries in North America. It's 350 years old. Many of the people I represented and continue to represent come from families that have been fishing the river continuously since Dutch colonial times. It's a traditional gear fishery. They use the same fishing methods that were taught by the Algonquin Indians to the original Dutch settlers of New Amsterdam, passed down through the generations. And one of the enclaves of the commercial fishery on the Hudson is a little village called Crotonville, New York. It's 30 miles north of New York City on the east bank of the river. People who lived in that village were very much, in many ways, like the people that I've met since I started visiting the Bahamas. These were people who were not, they were not your prototypical kind of affluent environmentalists. Were factory workers, carpenters, lathers, electricians. Half the people in Crotonville made their living, or at least some part of it, fishing or crabbing in the Hudson. They had little expectation, for the most part, that they'd ever see Yosemite or Yellowstone or the Everglades or any of our national parks. For them, their environment was their backyard. It was the bathing beaches, the swimming holes, and the fishing holes of the Hudson. That was their property values. It was their livelihood. It was their recreational opportunities. Richie Garrett, who was the first president of Riverkeeper, used to say about the Hudson, it's our Riviera, it's our Monte Carlo. Richie Garrett was a gravedigger from Ossining, New York. He used to tell his new followers, I'll be the last to let you down. But in 1966, Penn Central Railroad began vomiting oil from a 4.5-foot pipe from the Croton Harmon rail yard into the Hudson. The oil went up the river on the tides, and it blackened the beaches, and it made the shad taste of diesel. The shad were the principal commercial fishery of the Hudson, and they tasted like diesel fuel, and they couldn't be sold at the Fulton Fish Market in New York City. And all the people in Crotonville came together in a room about half this size. It was the only public building in the town. It was the American Legion Hall. It was a very patriotic community. There were 300 people there who stayed there past 1 o'clock in the morning. It was a very patriotic community. In fact, Crotonville, New York had the highest mortality rate during World War II of any town in the United States. Virtually the entire male population joined the Marines the day after Pearl Harbor. Almost all the original founders and board members and officers of Riverkeeper were former Marines. They were combat veterans from World War II and Korea, ultimately Vietnam. These weren't radicals, they weren't militants, they were people whose patriotism was rooted in the bedrock of our country. But that night they started talking about violence because they saw something that they thought they owned, which was the purity of this water that they had used since they were children and their parents had used for generations, and the abundance of the fisheries which their parents had exploited and relied on for generations, and it was being stolen from them by large corporate entities over whom they had no control. And the government agencies that were supposed to be protecting them from pollution seemed to be on the side of the polluters. And Richie Garrett, who was the first president of Riverkeeper, the grave digger, and who was also a former Marine, fought in Korea, and another comrade vet from Korea named Art Klauka made 20 separate visits to the Corps of Engineers office in New York City and Manhattan and begged the Corps colonel, whose job it was to shut down that pipe, to do his job and close that pipe. And finally the Corps colonel told them in exasperation, "These are important people. Speaking of the Penn Central Board of Directors, we can't treat them that way. In other words, we can't force them to comply with the laws, and because they're too powerful." And by this evening in March of 1966, virtually everybody in Crotonville had come to the conclusion that government was in cahoots with the polluters. And the only way that they were going to reclaim the river for themselves is if they confronted the polluters directly. And somebody suggested that they put a match to the oil slick coming out of the Penn Central pipe and burn up the pipe. Somebody else said they should roll a mattress up and jam it up the pipe and flood the rail yard with its own waste. Somebody else suggested that they float a raft of dynamite into the intake of the Indian Point power plant, which at that time was killing 1 million fish a day on its intake screens and taking food off their family tables. And a man stood up, whose name was Bob Boyle. He was another Korean war vet, another Marine, and he was a famous fisherman. He was the outdoor editor for Sports Illustrated magazine, and he still is today. He's been there for 65 years. He'd written half a dozen books on angling, on fly fishing, and spin fishing. He was one of the gurus of dry fly tying in our country. And 2 years before, he had written an article about angling